Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another video in which we continue to actually talk about the human resource module. So, if you've been following all my videos so far, we are, of course, talking about Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation and the HR module that has been integrated into the Dynamics 365 infrastructure. So today we're going to start discussing about the tab up on top of the screen, which is called Person. So quite a few videos that we've talked about work, how you hire an employee, for instance, some of the configurations that are required. So all of that was completed. Now we have been transitioning day by day into some of the other functionalities that are available within the system that you can use, and some of the experiences that I share, my implementation experiences that I will share with you along the way. So today, right underneath the person tab, we're going to talk about the identification numbers. And if you have configured the identification numbers in one of my previous videos, quite a few videos a while back that I had created where we talked about the identification numbers. This is that video which will connect the ledger, or not the ledger parameters, but the HR parameters, where we had defaulted identification numbers. We had also configured some of the identifications. And today we're going to assign this identification number from an end user perspective. So I have an employee, Andre, who I have selected, and I'm going to click on identification numbers. Right now, Andre does not have any sort of identification. So normally there would be some sort of an identification for an employee who has been hired into the organization. So this would be one of those steps where you would, as an HR manager or HR associate, would enter their information. Information like the identification type would be something that you would select from a drop-down menu. So the information that we talked about was like a driver's license, for instance, right? So this is the driver's license that we created a long time ago. And then you enter a number based on the configuration that we had completed. So if I were to add a number, then this would be their driver's license number. I can put in a description of it. I can make this primary, and I can also have an issuing agency, so either government or state legislation. So in our case, within Canada, it could be province, not a state. So that is also configurable, and then we talked about how you can configure that. The issue date is also available, so when was this identification issued? Of course, that is simply for reference purposes, and then you can make it, give an expiry date as well. So issuing date, we will just make it government. So all of this is informational purposes. Going back to the primary piece, so as I've been talking a lot about my implementation experience and how that can be very useful. That's basically me sharing knowledge, consulting knowledge with you, just to get you step into what an actual consultant should be thinking about. So this primary can play a big role or a small role depending on the scope of the work, based on the integration pieces. So if a driver's license is required, for instance, you can have multiple driver's licenses, right? So there's no limitation in the system that would prevent you from creating multiple driver's licenses as long as this driver's license number is different. So if, as long as it's unique, if it's the same, then the system will prompt you with an error. And that is it's intuitive because you cannot have the same driver's license, multiple driver licenses with the same number. So this is where the primary key comes in. So if one of these driver's licenses were primary, I can use this primary key for my integration that I would need to send out some sort of information to payroll, for instance. So I've seen in my implementations where I have sent the driver's licenses, quite a few driver's licenses that we have configured for an employee, because they tend to work in different provinces. So all of that was required to be captured here, but only one was primary because their address of residence was, or the province where they resided was their primary address. So the driver's license associated to that province was, something that we needed to consider just for that business process. And that's why this primary key was very crucial in that part. So it really depends how creative you get with these implementations. So I had used that for one of my clients where I needed to send a driver's license to a payroll team. So moving on to the personal context. So while I still have a little bit of a time, I figured I might as well go to personal context and then we'll call it off and then move on to screens and image. So if you click on personal context, you can see a new form being created. Form, I guess it just appeared and then we'll create a new form. So if I click on new, I can give a name to this personal content and I'll show and I'll explain a little bit about the significance of this, and it plays quite a bit of a significant role in other processes. So now I've actually created a personal contact. So if I clicked on edit, there is a relationship of this personal contact. So quite a few other relationships that are applicable, that may be applicable, and you can select any one of those. So this is a drop down menu. Which you cannot actually configure. So it would be something along these lines that you would have to select if you really need to create an extension, if there's some sort of a unique relationship that your organization or client requires you to have, then of course you can create an extension for it through the technical resources. So in terms of relationship, I'll pick this as a child, right? And I can have this as an emergency contact. I can make them as a beneficiary. So if this child is a beneficiary of something, then that functionality is also available. If this is an actual dependent, so I'll put that toggle turned on, and then we can have a valid from, valid to, even the gender. So only 3 genders as of now. Their date of birth you can enter in here. If they're a full-time student, person with disabilities, court order support. So that's something that I haven't personally used, but it's applicable when the parents are I guess a divorce and whatnot. So that's not something that you would want to be, like an HR would want to know or whatnot. But I guess it's available here, and then domestic partnership. So the significance that I was mentioning with personal contact comes with benefits. So this employee can have a dependent, for instance, who they want to either enroll or remove from their benefits. And this is where you would create a dependent, and then you'll have all sorts of eligibility criteria associated with it for them to be allowed to be their dependent and be eligible to certain or specific benefit programs or benefit plans. And in this case, when you create a dependent, so it's a totally different process. I don't want to get into it, but you can, create an event where you could enroll those in, this contact or this dependent into the benefits. So personal contacts play a big role in the benefits. It's very integrated very well and nicely into that. Whereas the address, these are all informational purposes, contact information, all all something that is irrelevant, you could say. However, depending on your integration piece, these might be applicable. So maybe I can explain or give you an example of my integrations where I had used this personal contact form, and I'll tell you which fields that I actually had used in order for this integration to work. So in my development part of the integration, I had to use this toggle button as a dependent. So that was a trigger for me. Whenever somebody would, as an HR, would create a dependent, they'll turn this toggle button on. It would send a signal to my integration, to the payroll or to their benefit provider that a dependent has been turned on, but they haven't been eligible yet. So it just gives them the indicator that yes, there is a dependent now for this employee. And then I'll fill out this applicable information accordingly. So valid from and to date was applicable, gender, date of birth was very applicable, full-time student was very applicable. And then when we go into the dependent details, uh, their let me see, their overage dependent was very applicable. So there were benefit providers who had asked their employer, or who were their vendor basically, asked them that, okay, we would like to know if their dependents are overage dependent, because then we have to remove them. So this toggle button kind of played a good role and played a big role in that. And of course, everything is date effective. So whenever we change this, I had to actually use this field, unfortunately. Not something that would have been the ideal case, but this is where your creativity comes in. And I had to use this date to make it effective. So, I mapped this field every time this toggle button would turn on, and then integration will kick in accordingly. So this is just a glimpse of how the integration worked out, but there's so much more work obviously required in order for that integration to work. So with that, I think we'll stick to the plan where we've talked about the personal contact, we've talked about the identification numbers, and in the next video, we'll talk about screenings.